Okay, I am live. My name is Jason McChristian. This is my second video. And today I wanted to, it's going to be a little bit shorter than the first one because I'm going to be dealing simply with the percussion parts for my latest piece. So, as in my first video, I've been working on a work called FRAZETTA Suite, and this is one of the movements titled Dawn Attack. It's a pretty exciting piece, runs about 4 minutes, and I've laid down some percussion parts, and what I wanted to do was make some decisions regarding the number of players that I'm going to need and sort of finalize what instruments I'd like to use. Pardon me as I pause for a moment. Okay. So if you are watching, please feel free to write a comment. I'm totally open to any sort of constructive criticism you might have, and I appreciate you paying attention and following along. This is a lot of fun for me, and I hope it is for you too. Okay, so before I go further, I'd like to take a moment to plug my site. My website is www.jasonmcchristian.com, and there you can find information about my works, my latest pieces, any sort of upcoming performances. And you can also hear my music at soundcloud.com. Just search for Jason McChristian. And you can also purchase my music at jwpepper.com. or Sheet Music Plus, and also at scoreexchange.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter, and also friend me on LinkedIn if you'd like, as well as Facebook. Okay, so I am far enough into this piece so that I can start making some clear decisions about the instruments I'm going to be using and about how many players. I'm also not too far along the piece to let that sort of stifle any sort of creativity. So the work is essentially composed at this point. What needs to happen is a lot of the sections need to be fleshed out, orchestrationally speaking, and then the work needs to be finalized for about a month of editing work. But the music, like I said, the music's pretty much composed. So the decisions I make now, oh, the cat's here. The decisions I make now are not necessarily going to be creative ones. It's just going to be more pragmatic. With a percussion section, you have typically a finite number of players, and those players can usually play several percussion instruments. So what I'm trying to do is trying to make some decisions on exactly how many players are going to be required for the instruments that I've given. Now, the instruments that I chose are, based on, the musical material. And so I'm going to go through and see if there's any moments in the score where I could clean it up and also where I can make more practical decisions. So far I have laid out, I have timpani, and I always just assume 4 drums, sort of a standard setup. And as you can see here in the parts, I'm working with 4 percussion. So 3 battery percussionists, if you will, and a mallet percussion player. And I want to see if that's the case, because it would actually be nice to have fewer players required. On the other hand, I don't want so few players that the music does not get a chance to sort of breathe and be interesting. I very well could write for just snare drum, bass drum, cymbals, but I always like for my music to have a little more flavor than that. To use instruments like tambourine and bongos and hi-hats and that sort of thing. Typically, my first percussion part is a drum set part. It's kind of a standard thing in concert band music. I like it because it already gives your first player a lot to do. and they're just going to sit down and they're going to have instruments surrounding them, and it makes life, I think, a little bit easier both on the player as well as the composer. So let's go through this. Here at the beginning, I have highlighted, I have the timpani. Let me try to zoom in. And I've worked this out, so ideally there's 4 drums. So here's C, E flat, G flat, A, okay. And then I also have here, this is going to be a snare drum part, and I'll label that later on. And then I have tambourine, okay. So far it's only requiring 2 players. Hi-hat here up in the drum set. You'll see this strangely labeled. These are all just so that I get the sound right, these particular labels here. They're not set, the names may not even be correct. And in fact, they may not be in the correct location. You can see here xylophone is sort of way back. Because back here, as I was composing, I knew I was going to have a xylophone part come up. Because here at some point, I accidentally entered it again. And I don't actually use it until all the way here to measure 19. Okay. So I'm going to have snare drum in the drum set. This is a hi-hat. And then I have some toms here. Okay. And then I have some crash cymbals. I have a tambourine, and like I said, bass drum. Now this bass drum and tambourine part is going to be an issue. I could have the bass drum play one hand and just have the tambourine ready. And I might actually just accept that. It may not actually be much of an issue. This may be acceptable. If I needed to, I could certainly give this note, I'll use the word note loosely, not necessarily a pitch, but I could give it to the timpani player on their A drum. But they may not be necessary. It looks like this could be played by both of these parts could be played by one player. So I'm going to leave that for now, make some adjustments later on. Strange little natural sign there. Okay, then here I have 2 bongos in percussion 1 part. So I'm going to start making a list for myself so I can help keep track. In percussion 1, I'm working with so far snare drum, hi-hat, toms. I do need to decide exactly how many toms I'm going to be using. So far I'm working with 1. I could vary that up to make it a little more interesting. And also the bongo part here in percussion 2, it's labeled, mislabeled here as 3, will be 2 bongos. And then I also have, like I said, the xylophone part, which will be the mallet percussion part. Sometimes the scores, they'll have 2 percussion players and then 2 mallet percussion players. But I'm doing, it's just a slight variation on that. 3 percussionists and then 1 mallet player. Here at measure 23, you see it's labeled whip. I'm actually going to use a slapstick instead of a whip. Whip's not really an instrument we use. It's literally just a whip. The slapstick makes the same sound, but is much more practical to use. The reason why it's labeled whip here is just for simple playback. Okay, so far in percussion 3, I'm working with bass drum and tambourine and slapstick. Okay. Percussion 2, I'm working with bongos and crash cymbals. It's marked as sleigh bells here. I'll adjust that later. Okay, so note about the labels. In the left-hand corners, what I will eventually do is place percussion 1, percussion 2, percussion 3, and then I will write mallet percussion. MLT.PERC. I don't need to say 1 or 2 because I don't need to distinguish between them. There's only 1 player. And the reason I do that, you'll see scores, sometimes I'll say snare drum on the left or crash cymbal on the left. And I don't like to do that because I like to have it set in stone exactly how many players are going to be required and what group of instruments those players are expected to play. Some people like to do it another way. They like to say a crash cymbal part. Now, whoever kind of gets there and can handle it will play it. that to me is a little bit too random. I like to have things very well stated for the conductor and for the players. It's just my own personal preference. Okay, moving along in the music here, page 2. I see there's a tam-tam part in percussion 3. Okay. And now what I'm looking for, are there moments where I've thrown the music down for musical reasons? I'm not thinking practically when I'm composing necessarily. Are there moments where I've overlapped instruments? So for instance, in percussion 3 right now, I have a tam-tam, and I also have bass drum and tambourine. And did I, at some point, drop out a tambourine part, let's say in the second part, and the tam-tam at the same time? If that were the case, there's a couple of ways to deal with it. I could remove, all right, let's see, I could have both players, actually, excuse me, I could have one player play both instruments, the tam-tam and the tambourine, which is totally reasonable, actually. These instruments, if it's just a roll or a fast shake, could just require one hand. But if I have an elaborate rhythm, let's say, in the tambourine part, while striking the tam-tam, the likelihood of that being played by one player is very, very slim. So I might say, okay, the tambourine, I could take it out, or I could take out the tam-tam. Or I could produce a sound on the tam-tam that might be tambourine-like. Maybe a scrape on the tam-tam sounds somewhat like a tambourine. And so I could construct the music so it sounds both like a tam-tam and a tambourine at the same time. I could also have other players substitute. So for the moment, I could have a percussion 2 play the tambourine, pick up the tambourine, and play it while percussion 3 is still on the instrument, the tam-tam instrument. So these are things that I want to address here, see if there are any of those kinds of issues to deal with. So far, not running into anything. I do want to take a moment to talk about why I'm choosing this point to start to finalize the number of players. It is, and I said this at the beginning of the video, but I want to stress how important it is. If I were to start this process too early, if at the beginning of the composition I was going to say, okay, I've got 4 percussionists, I feel like I would be limiting myself very early on. If I were to say, okay, I'm going to be using these percussion instruments, maybe the music that I'm composing is not, does not require those particular instruments, or requires different types of instruments. So this is something that I like to leave a little bit open-ended. I like to leave it up in the air. I like to have that freedom of creativity as I'm composing the piece. I definitely do not compose the music after everything's written. Excuse me. I do not compose the percussion music after the rest of the music is written. The percussion music, in my mind, should be treated just like all the other instruments. As I'm composing, I'm also taking into consideration what the percussion are doing. Sometimes the percussionists themselves can have a melody. A snare drum can have a melody. It's not going to be a pitched melody like we expect it, but it can have a rhythm that is its own theme. For example, you look at Symphony No. 3 by William Schumann. There's a wonderful snare drum. It's like a fugue section, essentially, and there's a wonderful snare. It just starts off with the snare drum. The snare drum actually has the rhythm that the solo bass clarinet will then take on. Even though the bass clarinet adds pitches, the rhythm is the same. So really, really great ways to use percussionists out there. Going back to the planning. Now, I want to also choose this moment to finalize the percussion, because what I don't want to happen is all the music is composed and I'm dead set on having tuned cowbells, the Armglocken. I'm dead set on having the Glockenspiel. I want the chimes. I want all these instruments. And now it would be harder for me to go back and make drastic changes and remove instruments. So I feel that I am at the point early enough in the music and late enough in the music to be able to both have creativity and also take on the practical matters of writing for percussion. The practical matters are not to be downplayed. It is really, really important to understand just what goes into having a percussion section in your ensemble. A lot of issues arise from just the fact that these instruments are large, that they need to be driven in by a truck many times. So it's a matter that should not be taken lightly. I apologize if I'm pausing here, but my cat is on the table and being very disruptive. Okay. All right, let's move along. So continuing here on page 2, I again have bass drum here along with the bongos. The bongos should be on percussion 2. Okay. And that actually works out well because percussion 3 should have the tam-tam. Again, bass drum, tam-tam in this situation, not tambourine. These instruments can be played at the same time, so later on I will place the bongo part into percussion 2 and I will bring the tam-tam back to percussion 3. So this is a good moment. This is a situation where because I was composing in the moment, I knew I was working with bongos, and I just kind of threw them down into a staff, maybe the closest staff nearby, you know. And in my haste, I wasn't worrying about things like, who should actually be playing this part. When I compose, I like to write pretty quickly. I move along pretty quick. I always go back and orchestrate, and I always go back and edit. But the actual process itself, pretty quick. This particular work was written in a week, from beginning to end. And again, when I say written, it's fairly crude. I would say it's probably 70% actually orchestrated. Okay, we're on to page 3 now. Bongo part again is in the wrong staff. That's okay. We'll adjust that later. Should be staff 2. This part right here at 78 may be a tambourine part. I'm going to have to look into it. I may also have the tambourine play, and it would be in percussion 3. Okay, this xylophone clef can go away for now. In fact, this mallet percussion part is only going to be xylophone, it looks like. Okay, which is fine with me. Bongo's now on the correct staff in this case. And then I also have a suspended cymbal, so I need to write this in my list. Percussion 3 also has a percussion cymbal. Okay, this will be written a little bit differently. What I like to do with percussion is I like to write essentially a quarter note, you know, the simplest rhythm, or a note head, I should say. And then I will place a tie. Okay. Should be somewhere around here. This is usually left for the editing, the time to edit, but I will give you an example of what I mean here. So this LV tie I like to place. Okay. This will affect the playback. There's a sound of the suspended cymbal ringing if I place whole notes and they're tied together. But if I just have a quarter note, it won't ring. It only sustain for a quarter note, which is accurate to the way it's notated. So in this case, I will actually expand this duration of the sound to give you an idea. And it's ringing for quite a while. That's what we want. Very realistic. All right, we're getting to the final page of the work. Like I said, this will be a short video today. Percussion 3 again, suspended cymbal. Okay, ending with bongos, drum, and I'll probably even very likely to add a xylophone part at the end. I don't like to have, you can see it's all double forte, very exciting music at the end. I don't like to leave one player standing there with nothing to do. It bugs me to no end when I see that. So I will certainly involve percussion, the mallet percussion part here at the end. Okay, so let's just quickly review. Percussion 1, I'm going to use snare drum, hi-hat, toms. I need to finalize the number of toms. I'm pretty sure it's actually, in this case, just 1. And then I believe there was a suspended cymbal part. Oh, yes. Let's go back here just a moment. Here, tom, and then I also have 2 So like a China cymbal, which is an inverted symbol, and then this one is probably just some sort of small suspended symbol. I've lately gotten into what are called lion symbols. It's essentially a China symbol, but there are different sizes of what are called lion symbols. And so that might be what I would be working with here. I need to finalize that decision. All right, but essentially two sizes. One's a little bit larger and one's a little bit smaller. As I understand, actually, the size of the symbol does not necessarily determine the actual pitch. I've heard that in some cases that the shape that the symbol is manufactured in can affect the range, which I find kind of interesting. If there's any percussionists out there who can confirm or deny that, let me know. It sounds like an interesting phenomenon. Okay, and so let's see. Percussion 2 then has a crash cymbal and bongos, and 2 of them. Percussion 3 has a suspended cymbal, tam, bass drum, slapstick, tambourine, and mallet percussion xylophone. I will point out one slight little issue here is percussion 2 is only dealing with bongos and crash cymbal, while percussion 3 has 5 different instruments. Not necessarily a huge issue. The music certainly warrants it, but I wonder if there's a moment where I could go back and say give one of these instruments then to percussion 2. So that percussion 3 would end up with 4 instruments and percussion 2 would end up with 3 instruments, making it a little bit more even. It may just be an issue, though, of playing time. So that'll be something I'll want to consider. But that's not for this video. That concludes this video. I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope it was informative and interesting in some level. All right, thank you. Bye.